Okay, there we go. So hi, Zanae Brooks. I'm running for state auditor, and this is part of our kind of state finance informational series. So today I'm talking to Senator Shelli Yoder. And Senator Yoder, if you could tell us just a little bit about like your background and how you got to like where you are now.
It's so wonderful to be with you. Hoosiers are very, very fortunate to be able to have you to vote for and support in this upcoming election. And I've been incredibly impressed by how hard you've been working and how diligent you have been up until now, and what an opportunity Hoosiers have to support you and to have a chance to have an auditor who can bring some checks and balances into the state house, because that is really what we are missing. Right now, we don't just have a super majority, we have an excessive majority, and there are no checks and balances. And it is time that we create those. And one way that we can get that is by electing you into the auditor's office. I came about through just volunteering and being a somebody committed to this idea of service through the community, and I had never run for anything before, much like you, and decided to run for Congress, U.S. Congress, a decade ago in 2012. And initially, I got a lot of what qualifies you to run for Congress, and why don't you run for another office uh, instead of something so large like a congressional seat right out of the gate. And here's why I did. And I can relate to why you decided to run. Because I really felt, number one, that we we need qualified individuals. And yes, I had never run for public office before, but what was needed in 2012 was a checks and balance, was a different kind of voice. And we had never been represented by a woman before. And I really was just convinced that we needed a woman on that ticket. And I kept looking and waiting, and that person did not show up. And so my husband and I decided, well, why don't we be that person? Why don't I put my name on that ballot? And I know you and I had many conversations before you decided to run. And there was not a doubt in anyone's mind that you weren't 110% qualified for the position. It was convincing you to actually to do it. And that's a big step. We know that women have to, more than men, need to be asked. And so for you to say yes, to be asked, and for you to sincerely say, I will do this, because it is a huge undertaking. And so running for office, at the time I had 3 young children, but we hit the ground running just like you did, and went to every corner of the 9th district in Indiana and met so many wonderful people who were ready for change, who were ready for somebody to stand up, to be a voice of reason, and really to fight for them. I know that that was one of the reasons why we were gaining so much momentum, but it's difficult to run in a district that leans so heavily Republican, but we were able to get much more support than what a lot of people had ever thought we would be able to receive. So we got that nomination. We were unsuccessful that first run, but you learn in politics you can't give up. I decided to run locally, and I served on the Monroe County Council for 8 years. And after that, I knew that the Senate seat at the state house was coming open because our current sitting state senator was retiring. And so I decided to run in 2020 for that seat and won. And here I am, and have a chance to work and get you elected. And I would be so honored to work alongside you in the state house, serving serving the people who live in Indiana and deserve a certified CPA, a Black woman representing them, because we just do not have that kind of representation at the State House. And so a vote for you is not only a vote for the hardest working woman that I've ever seen, not only for checks and balances, but really to make history. And
Right.
it's long overdue.
Yeah. Thank you for your support for sure. One thing I'm trying to help people understand too is like not just the auditor's office, but how the role the legislator plays in state finances, but also like policy and the different committees. And you are on the education and career development committee. Can you talk a little bit, just, you don't have to go through like all the bills and all of that, but just kind of like high level, what's that work look like?
Well, the work is incredibly important. It is the biggest budget item that Indiana has, is how we fund education. And I'm a 100% proponent of supporting public education because it is directly connected to how strong our democracy will be. And in the last couple of cycles, I have seen, or in the last couple of sessions, I have seen the real effort on the part of what feels like an excessive majority to begin to undermine, not begin, I mean, the undermining of public education has been happening for since 2008.
Mm-hmm.
But it's taken a very cynical, dark turn in the last couple of cycles. I mean, last year, we spent hours and hours on this anti-CRT bill in the Education Committee. And in the end, and Hoosiers did not want it.
Right.
We heard from Hoosiers far and wide, from business leaders to faith leaders to civic organization leaders to just regular folks who came out and said, this is the wrong direction. Why are we asking questions about teaching our children history?
Right.
Lifting up voices that have been for generations silenced. And now we're lifting up the full diversity of voices that have contributed to this country, this great country. Why are we spending so much time trying to silence those voices once again? Trying to, what they say, return us to a day when we didn't make people uncomfortable in the classroom. Well,
Right.
really what was being discussed was returning us to a day when people's voices and lives were silenced. And that's really what has sucked the life out of, or sucked the air out of the room in so many of our discussions in education. Public education is one of our greatest investments in Indiana. And education is the largest investment we make with public dollars. But those public dollars are not going to public education alone. Since 2008, we have continued to funnel more and more money to the private school voucher fund. At one point when the legislature voted to create the voucher system, it was created to help those students who come from low-income families. But in the last two sessions, what was defined as low income has significantly changed, and it's no longer low income. And so more and more dollars, public dollars, are being funneled into private education. We now have created what's called education savings accounts, and those dollars are increasing, and there's zero oversight. Let's think about it. There's no accountability, no transparency. There's no say in elected leaders to say what that curriculum is going to look like or how it's going to help in the long-term investment in future generations of Hoosiers, what commitment we have to young Hoosiers and to students. There's zero accountability on those dollars. And yet the excessive majority is continuing to funnel more and more public dollars into those savings accounts. So
Right.
that's why we need checks and balances in the State House. That's why a vote for you is a vote to support a checks and balance system to bring greater transparency, greater accountability to the public and to public tax dollars being spent in the state of Indiana for education.
Right. No, that's a great point, because that's one thing that I've been talking about is the accountability and like transparency when it comes to like, okay, we've allocated this much money. How is it being used and what's the effect of that? And I think from an education standpoint, you can look at the budget and say, oh, that's the majority of our budget, so it should be great. But then we think like, we know like K through 12, isn't fully funded, or, everybody doesn't have access. So what do you recommend from that perspective, or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, we still have a long way to go where we still charge tuition, textbooks. The state of
Right.
Indiana, we do not pay for the textbooks for students K through 12 to receive. And parents and guardians across the state receive a bill to send their kids to school, to public education.
Mhm.
And yet we are not blinking an eye. The excessive majority is supporting the expansion of vouchers, supporting no accountability, no transparency with those dollars. And yet we can't even fund the textbooks and the full education and access for 96% of Hoosier children who go to public
Mhm.
education.
Mhm.
That is not in balance. And so we
Right.
do have opportunities every single session to create greater transparency, to create greater accountability, and to create better access for our children in Indiana. But
Right.
it's difficult to get those bills passed, but we still show up and we still file those bills, but it is increasingly difficult because of the way, well, it sort of starts with the way that districts are drawn, district lines. So there's more gerrymandering, and it seems like we're a more Republican state than what we really are. So my hope is that this November, when people go to the polls, I hesitated because people will be able to start voting in October, but when they start voting, that they keep that in mind and they realize it is time to create greater balance in Indiana and vote for Zane Brooks for auditor. Here is, it's interesting. This past weekend, I went to a reunion, and at that reunion, there was a representative from all the other states, and so many people say, I've been surprised by watching the news. I didn't realize that Indiana was so conservative. That was never my experience of Indiana in years past. It was a 30th anniversary reunion. So, we were all, women in our prime.
Sure.
And I said, the thing is, we are not a state of extremes, but the way that our districts have been drawn over the last couple of generations and decades from the census, it would appear so, but that is actually not a reflection of Indiana. So we need to do a better job. We need to get people to the polls, people need to take responsibility for upholding the democratic principles of this country, of this state, and bring greater balance in government and who serves us to the State House.
Right. Well, my last question is kind of leaning into that, but like what keeps you going, what keeps you working, or, what's something inspiring, that wakes you up to just encourage you to keep fighting in the middle of, a super or excessive majority?
Well, we're going to have those conversations when you get elected. We're going to go to lunch a lot and talk this through. Like, how do we find the hope that is needed? And if I'm ever going to be criticized, I mean, I have been criticized in the past by being a pretty optimistic person and somebody who is resilient. And if you're going to do this work, you have to have a great deal of resilience and optimism and hope, because we cannot be discouraged. So what keeps me going is when I have conversations with people in my district who do feel that they are being silenced or not seen, not heard. And that keeps me going. Because as a person of faith, growing up and listening to what is the role of a faithful person, it really is to stand up for the least of these. And so for many people, they do feel that their voice or their presence is not respected, needed, important. And I come at this work realizing the real privilege and responsibility it is to just keep going to, if you want to talk about wrestling, keep going to the mat and working hard to lift up those that feel that they've been beaten down and do not matter, to make those individuals feel like they do matter. And we can't give up. But really, this comes down to making sure that voting is accessible and people feel like their vote matters. And it matters now more than ever. It matters every single election. So I just want to encourage people to get registered, because you have until October 11th to get registered. And then to get to the polls, definitely by November 8th, to vote for greater balance, vote for representation, vote for making history in Indiana, and voting for you, Zanae Brooks, for auditor.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you for talking today. Hopefully people learn more about you, about your role, and we're a little inspired. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for running. And I look forward to how you're going to be able to serve the people of Indiana, and how fortunate we are that that opportunity is going to be ours. So thank you.
Thank you.